Today's lecture is about the visual elements. The visual elements are essentially the building blocks of visual language. And today we will observe these visual elements in a variety of different artworks, two-dimensional and three-dimensional. Visual elements are considered to be the building blocks. Principles of design are the building methods with those building blocks. That will be discussed in a following lecture. The visual elements are line, shape, mass, space, time, motion, light, color, and texture. Most people are very familiar with these terms, but we're going to apply them to works of art. We're going to discover these visual elements inside of works. First off, let's begin with line. Here we can see a variety of variations on line. We can see an actual line, implied line, actual straight lines, an implied curve line, line created by an edge, vertical line, attitude of alert attention, horizontal line, attitude of rest, diagonal lines, which suggest slow action or fast action, sharp, jagged line, dance of curving lines, hard line versus a soft line, ragged, irregular line. A line is a long, narrow mark. Length always predominates over height or depth. And as I said before, edges are perceived as lines. These two Japanese prints have similar subjects, kabuki actors, but they use line in radically different ways. If you look at the image on the left, the line is curvy and it suggests slow, rhythmic motion. In contrast, the image on the right uses more angular lines to express swift or violent motion. Very, very different feeling. Let's take a look at these two very, very different works. The work on the left uses stainless steel wire in short segmented lines that move in every direction. So it surrounds the viewer, and it's, in some sense, disorienting to the viewer. On the right, we can see that the artist uses line in a much more organized way to suggest elegant, open rectangles. This is done with black acrylic yarn. Let's take a look at line gesture quickly. Line gesture is most intensely pursued in figure drawing class. Every day at the beginning of figure drawing class, the students will spend several minutes doing what are called warm-up gestures, drawing very, very quickly, trying to capture the model moving every couple of seconds, trying to capture the long line, the gesture of the form. This is something that is very, very important to figuration, to capturing animals running or the natural quality of a body in motion, moving, etc. Now, let's take a look at the works by Antony Gormley. Notice how the lines seem to suggest motion or movement. Here we can see some very famous earthworks. The Spiral Jetty on the left and the Running Fence by Christo and Jean-Claude on the right. Both of these site-specific earthworks use this idea of line. Now, an earthwork is a large-scale, environment-altering project in which the surface of the earth becomes the artist's canvas. We can see in Christo's fence here that it looks as if it's the Great Wall of China meandering over the Central California landscape and vanishing into the ocean, going 24.5 miles. We can also see Robert Smithson's use of line into the Great Salt Lake. The image is a little bit perplexing. It looks like we're looking into the sky, but we're actually on a hill looking down into the Great Salt Lake. This is actually large enough to drive a dump truck around it. Take a look at implied lines. Implied lines can suggest visual connections and can serve as an underlying organizational structure. We're taking a look at this Baroque painting. We can see the triangle. This is something that's a very popular organizational structure that's used in the Renaissance and Baroque periods. We can see the suggestion of the triangles from the bodies. Even looking at line simply as an animating feature, we can see here, looking at the evolution of figuration in ancient Greek art, we can see the earliest archaic Greek statues. The classical, they introduce contrapposto, there's a little bit more movement, weight shift of the hips. And then we see the late classical, the arms sticking out. And then finally, we have the Laocoon and his sons, this Trojan priest who's struggling with the serpents that have come to kill him and his children. You can see the extreme linear qualities in movement and the agitation, very, very dramatic. Eliza Schult, look at this very clever use of line. This is called the alphabet. We can see that these big, heavy, bold lines spell out the word alphabet, A-L-P-H-A-B-E-T. And then on top of that, in a very light, lyrical dance, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, on and on and on down through here. It's a very interesting exercise of calligraphy, so to speak. Now, let's take a quick look at the idea of shape. Shape is the area within the outline of an object or figure. Now, the words shape, mass, form are sometimes used interchangeably, but really they mean different things in the visual arts. So, as I said, shape is the area within the outline of an object or a figure. When we see a 3D object in light, we see that it has mass or volume. It has height, it has a width, it has depth. But if the same object is silhouetted, we would see it as a flat shape. Mass is the physical bulk of a solid body of material, something that has height, width, and depth. When mass encloses space, the space is called volume. This is a work from Kara Walker, Keys to the Coop. Here is the Dutch designer M.C. Escher, Sky and Water. We can see how the shapes change places. Actually, we can see the positive shapes and the negative. The negative is the unfilled. We'll see this in a moment. But you can see here that the birds slowly, as we move downward, become the space, the water, between the fish. And the fish themselves become the space between the birds. It's a very clever use of shape. Metamorphosis of Hitler's face into a moonlit landscape accompaniment. You can see the canoe and the tree and the lake. If you take your head, try to touch your right ear to your right shoulder, turn your head to the sideways, and you look. What you are actually looking at is a gigantic nose of Adolf Hitler. You can see here when it's turned around the right way. He is playing with shape, tricking us, if you will. Positive and negative shapes. A positive shape is a filled space. It's a figure or a foreground shape as opposed to a negative ground or a background shape. Okay? Negative shapes are a background or a ground shape seen in relation to foreground or figure shapes. Okay? So, this chair is a positive shape. The background is negative. Okay? Now we can see these different inversions here. But this is the negative space are these holes in between here. And they are just as important as positive. Take a look here at some of these very striking sculptures using positive and negative shapes dramatically. Look at this implied shape. This is called non-sign 2. It's on the U.S.-Canadian border near Vancouver. They're using steel rods to suggest pollution. So this is what the sky should look like, and this is what the pollution around it is. You can see other images of it. It's a very striking work, very dramatic. Take a look at Greg Pace's work, Alumina. Look at the bodies. Can you notice the shapes, these profiles of the negative shapes? So he has created these ceramic vases very carefully and very specifically to create this negative space in between them. We can see these women are all facing each other. You can see these two children facing each other. We can see items, plates with patterns and whatnot behind this here. Quite a lot of fun. The artist Kim Abeleys uses shape in a very interesting way. These are her famous presidential commemorative smog plates, where she essentially puts stencils of shapes of the president's faces, former presidents, puts their faces on these plates, and then leaves the plates on top of her studio in Los Angeles to capture the smog. And so they're smog paintings of the presidents, and then she takes in gold and writes on there what these presidents said that they were going to do for the environment, to sort of reveal these contradictions. They're painted with the pollution. It's a very clever, very political work as well. The term mass. Mass is the physical bulk of a solid body of material. The Giacometti image on the left, the man pointing, conveys a sense of fleeting presence rather than permanence. He is interacting into the space. The horse, on the other hand, Botero's horse sculpture on the right, is bulky and it's immense, and it doesn't interact with the surrounding space like the man pointing for sure. Take a look at Michael Heiser's levitated mass at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. We can see this gigantic Herculean stone that appears suspended perilously over this walkway, right? This has an enormous sense of mass, and even installing this was quite the event as well. 340-ton boulder. Wow. Take a look at Le Grand Arch in La Défense. This is in France, and what's interesting about this is that the cutout of this gigantic opening in this building is so large that it could actually contain the Cathedral of Notre Dame in its entirety underneath us. Space. Space is the indefinable, general receptacle of all things, the seemingly empty space around us. Of all the visual elements, space is the most difficult to convey in words and pictures. To experience 3D space, we must be in it. Take a look at these two images here. Right? We can see this gigantic structure, and at the Reagan-Washington National Airport, you can watch what's going on outside. It's very hard to know what this is like without being inside. And we can see this installation here. This is essentially a giant wall that makes you feel as if the room goes on for infinity. But it's actually a wall that is lit up very convincingly. Here we can see implied depth in 2 dimensions. Okay, so we can see the overlap and diminishing size, vertical placement, overlap, vertical placement, and diminishing size, right? These are clues to spatial depth and are major ways to indicate space on a picture plane. A linear perspective is a system of perspective in which parallel lines appear to converge as they recede into the distance, meeting at a vanishing point. Now, this is a famous painting by Raphael, the School of Athens. Linear perspective was systematized, codified, if you will, in the Renaissance. It's thought to have been around since the ancient Greeks and Romans, but we don't have any evidence of them systematizing it, turning it into a system. Okay, they do so. Brunelleschi, the famous Renaissance architect, codifies it and turns it into this way that you can teach people. Notice how the architectural lines all converge to the vanishing point, creating a sense of dramatic, deep space. We also have what's called atmospheric perspective. This is something we all know. If you live in a big city like Southern California, like Los Angeles, it's a nonlinear means for giving the illusion of depth, which is created by changing color, value, and detail. As things get further away, they get cooler, they have less value and less detail. As space comes closer to us, we have more contrast, more value, more details, more texture, etc. Okay. We all know this, as I said before, because in Los Angeles there's often a lot of smog, and so looking at the San Gabriel Mountains sometimes, even though they're very close, they can appear very, very distant because of all of the material and gunk that's in the air. Time and motion. Time is considered to be the, quote, 4th dimension in which events occur in succession. Time and motion become major elements in visual media such as film, video, and some works of sculpture. Now, this right here, the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul, Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that time is linear, that it continuously moves forward. We can see here on this road, the time is moving on here towards culminating right here. The Aztecs believed time was cyclical and that the earth was subject to cycles of destruction and recreation, and their calendar stone embodies this idea. At the center of this stone is the face of the sun god representing the present world, surrounded by these four little rectangular compartments that each represent one previous incarnation of the world. The stone's round, which symbolizes the circular nature of time. We can see implied motion, creating a sense of movement, expresses a life-like quality. We can see here that this portrays the Hindu god as a playful child who just stole his mother's butter supply and now dances with glee. It's a very dynamic pose. We can see 20th century European artists, a group called the Futurists, regarded motion and speed as the most important subjects. This is the famous painting Marcel Duchamp, Nude Descending a Staircase. Now, this is influenced by photography and film. This painting, when it was shown in the United States, was very scandalous when it was shown in 1913 for the first time. The critics thought that this work was, that it looked like an explosion in a shingle factory, or that it looked like a staircase descending a nude, right? They just couldn't understand it because in the United States, artists and the culture of the art world, so to speak, was really making artwork like they did in Europe in the 1860s. So because the United States was a very baby country, it was very conservative early on. Of course, this changed after the introduction of European modernism in the early part of the 20th century, this being a centerpiece of that. Now, let's take a look at Jenny Holzer. This is in the Guggenheim Museum. What she's done is that she's created this helix display sign that goes around the building with sayings of her own invention. And the sayings seem to progress down the ramp in a continuous flow, but in reality, the lights go on and off at carefully programmed intervals. Holzer is, in a sense, showing us how the mass media bombards us with input. Okay. We also have actual motion, right? This is a work that relies on air movement to perform its subtle dance. Okay, now this is obviously very, very large, 8.5 feet by 9'6" in that's really big. Alexander Calder is the one who invented what we call mobiles that you hang over babies' cribs. His works are kinetic. They have movement. In this work, the artist hangs colored markers off of tree branches and positions paper on a sturdy tripod next to them. Okay, this captures the battle between the wind and the tree. In some interesting sense, this seems to illustrate what a tree does in a windstorm, for example. It chooses to bend rather than break. And, it reveals the powerful force of wind, which is otherwise invisible. Light. Everything we see is made visible by the radiant energy we call light. Sunlight, natural light, contains the colors of light that make up the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Light can be manipulated in a variety of ways. It can be reflected, refracted, diffused, diffracted. You can do a number of things with light. Take a look at the Lincoln Memorial detail that we've got right here. The way light falls on a subject powerfully influences how we see it. A simple shift in the direction of light can dramatically change how we perceive the sculpture of Abraham Lincoln, for example. When the work was initially installed, the artist was disturbed by the lighting because sunlight was reflecting off of the floor, and it made Lincoln seem like a frightened man. They fixed the problem by installing spotlights over the sculpture. This makes Lincoln look more decisive, serious, thoughtful, stern. This idea of revealing or rendering mass by light is really a predominantly Western preoccupation. Okay, it really began with Italian artists in the 15th century. Value, which is also called tone, is the relative lightness or darkness of surfaces. This image shows that we perceive value as a relationship rather than as an isolated form. This strip in the center here is the same gray, but look at how it changes depending if it's next to white or black. To reveal form, artists use changes in value. A gradual shift from lighter to darker values can give the illusion of a curving surface, while an abrupt change, like in this cube, usually indicates an abrupt change in surface direction. This is called chiaroscuro in drawing, the gradations of light and dark values in two-dimensional images. It's done without outlines. In naturalistic, realistic drawings, outlines can't be independent. They must belong to either the figure or the ground. This artist not only uses light, but also movement in her digital media works of beautiful natural phenomena. Let me show you quickly. Look at this tree move. Jennifer Steinkamp is one of my favorite digital media artists, if you will. These are computer generated, and then they are projected on walls with the utmost precision. The works are hypnotic and breathtaking. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? You can search her up. Let me show you one more Jennifer Steinkamp, because these are so beautiful. This is called Rapunzel. Observe the precision of the projection. It's very mesmerizing, very stunning use of technology. Color. White light refracted by a prism. Individual colors are components of white light. Okay, the phenomena of color is a paradox. Color exists only in light, but light itself seems colorless to the human eye. Objects that have color are merely reflecting the colors that are present in the light that illuminates them. Isaac Newton discovered that white light is composed of all the colors of the spectrum. John Keats, a British poet writing a little bit later, had said that Newton, with his investigations into color, that he was unweaving the rainbow, that he was taking the poetry out of things by unweaving the rainbow, making it, explaining it, so to speak. Right. Now, here we have the very straight up traditional color wheel. Now, I've got some terms here. They're really, really basic. Hue means color. Value is the relative lightness or darkness of a hue. So adding black produces a shade. Adding white produces a tint. Intensity is the purity of a hue. Saturation. Okay? Blacks and whites are not true colors. And their combination gray, these are achromatic. And they're referred to as neutrals. You can see here at the top the value going from white to black, a variation in red, right? So we can see white, it's pink. Here's the pure hue, as pure as it can be, and it's its most saturated and brightest. And then as we add in the shades, look, they get darker. Here's intensity down here. Pure hue, and they become dulled when you dirty them, when you mix them. The left here, this is what we call a subtractive color mixture. This is the one that everyone knows. Blue plus yellow gives you green. Yellow plus red gives you orange, etc., etc. Okay? This is based on pigments, right? The three pigment primaries are red, yellow, and blue. Okay? These pigment mixtures are called subtractive color mixtures. On the right are the additive color mixture. Those are light primaries. This is a lesser known triad of red, orange, green, and blue, violet. These are the electric colors that combine to produce white light. These are the colors of our TVs and that our computers and screens use. Local color. You might hear this in a painting class. The local color means the color of an object as we experience. It's without shadows or reflection. Now, here's a computer graphic scene of colored objects. These are the local colors of the objects in the box, ignoring those lights and shadows. We have three color schemes: monochromatic, analogous, and complementary hues. Monochromatic, mono, one, chromatic, color, using one color. Analogous colors, those are colors lying next to each other on the color wheel, or near each other. Complementary hues are colors lying opposite each other on a color wheel. Warm and cool colors. The blue-green side of the color wheel seems cool in psychological temperature, and the red-orange side is warm. The difference between warm and cool colors may come chiefly from our own personal associations. Colors affect our feelings about size, distance, as well as temperature. Cool colors appear to contract and recede. Warm colors appear to expand and advance. Joseph Albers. Joseph Albers was a German-born artist and an educator. He taught at the famous Bauhaus and the Black Mountain College in the United States, and he even headed Yale's Department of Design. He's considered one of the most influential teachers of visual arts in the 20th century. He's best known for his work as an abstract painter and theorist, but he works in several disciplines, including photography, typography, printmaking, and even murals. At the Bauhaus, he taught among the famous artists Vasily Kandinsky and Paul Klee. Some of his notable students are people like Robert Rauschenberg, Cy Twombly, Ruth Ossowa, Richard Anuskevich, and Eva Hesse, among others. Take a look at this image. This is monochromatic. This is one color. Let's take a look at Henri Matisse, Polynesia, the Sea. These are part of his famous colored paper cutouts. When Matisse got old, he was infirm, he was wheelchair bound, he had difficulty painting, so he had his assistants bring him colored paper and he drew on it with the scissors, creating these very jazzy and memorable paper cutouts. This image right here would be monochromatic. Remember, white's not a color and we see blues. Now let's look at Pablo Picasso's The Old Guitarist. This is part of his blue period. This was inspired initially by one of Picasso's friends who committed suicide over unrequited love. Picasso uses the dominant theme of blue over and over. This has other colors in it, obviously, with the guitar, but it's mostly monochromatic. This image by Vincent van Gogh, the color scheme is complementary, uses blue and orange. Those were colors that Van Gogh enjoyed putting together because they're opposite ends of the color wheel, and when you put them together, they resonate. They have conversations with each other. This Keith Haring image, square head with three eyes, this is also complementary, red and green, Christmas colors. Here we have the View of Toledo by the Mannerist painter El Greco. The color scheme in this landscape would be considered analogous because the blue sky and the green landscape are the dominant colors. Green and blue are next to one another on the color wheel. Texture. Texture is tactile qualities of surfaces or the visual representation of those qualities. They can be actual textures that can be felt, or they can be implied by simulation. As children, we explored our surroundings by touching everything within reach, and we learned to equate the feel with the look of surfaces. Even as adults, we still enjoy the pleasures of touching the fur on a pet, of gliding our hands across our puppy dogs or cats, or even touching a very smooth, polished wood banister or piece of furniture. This famous work by Merritt Oppenheim uses a cup and saucer and spoon and covers them in fur. This work was inspired over a joke at lunch with Pablo Picasso and Dora Maar. Merritt Oppenheim was with them in a Parisian cafe when Picasso had made the comment that anything could be covered with fur. Merritt Oppenheim later ran off to the store and bought this cup and saucer and spoon and then covered it with a Chinese gazelle fur and called it Object. In doing this, she transformed these items which were associated with tradition, decorum, and feminine refinement into this confounding surrealist sculpture. This was part of the Surrealist Manifesto, to take useful things and make them useless, to take mundane things and present them in unexpected ways because they had the power to challenge reason, to connect people to their subconscious. We can see Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers. Van Gogh expresses himself so forcefully, not only with color, but with texture. And you can see the marks of paint on here. This is a painting technique that's referred to as impasto, or thickly applied paint. But the texture is a vivid sign of the artist's presence. When you see these images in person, you want to lick on them, lay on them. They're like frosting on a cake. They are very tactile. Now let's take a look at Jeff Koons' Balloon Dog. This is actually a large sculpture made out of stainless steel. You can see the texture is very convincing. It feels just like one of those very shiny little balloon dogs that clowns and entertainers used to make for children. This is actually quite large, made out of metal. Anselm Kiefer, from Hearts and Brains, The Stalks of Night Are Sprouting. Anselm Kiefer is a German artist whose work covers a broad range of cultural, literary, and philosophical ideas, from the Old Testaments to Kabbalah mysticism, Norse mythology, in Wagner's Ring Cycle to poetry of Paul Celan. He was born during the closing months of World War II, and his work reflects upon Germany's post-war identity and history, trying to grapple with the national mythology of the Third Reich. Now, in his works, these are very large paintings. He covers them. You can see here this has emulsion, oil, acrylic, shellac, straw, gold leaf, wood, and metal on canvas. These works have an enormous presence because of their texture. Portrait of the Princess de Broglie. Ingres clearly took pleasure in painting the fashions of what's called Second Empire Paris. Look at how he's captured this icy blue gown of the Princess de Broglie, how he's captured the perfect blend of material wealth and perfect grace and reserve. The texture in this painting is very convincing. I'd like to compare the textures of three different figurative artists. On the left, we have Barbara Hepworth. In the middle, we have Donatello's Mary Magdalene, the wooden sculpture. And then on the right, we have the British artist, Antony Gormley. On the left, we can see that Hepworth uses this very soft, smooth, rounded quality to her form, where in the middle, Donatello uses texture to make Mary Magdalene look emaciated, rough-hewn. Her hair covers her emaciated body, and we feel it. In the right, Antony Gormley makes the body out of pieces, what would essentially be pixels, perhaps, out of these little metal cubes. A very striking differences in all three of a use of texture. Now, this concludes our lecture. Thank you very much.